when someone calls you sensitive, like you're too sensitive, you're so sensitive, what they're actually interpreting is their own emotional experience of the world. That's what they're interpreting.
Is the thought of being imperfect keeping you from taking action? Welcome to Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans. Each week, we give you real-life stories and thought-provoking research that inspires your soul to live a more fulfilled life through your own actions. From the heart of Calgary, Canada, here are your hosts, award-winning coaches, Christopher Lawrence and Kyle Kalu.
Hello.
It's showtime. Showtime.
Really big show.
Are you ready to rumble? I was like that. Are you ready to rumble? I don't know. Was that World Wrestling Federation, WWF? That was my Toronto days of watching.
You know what bothers me about that? I just want to talk about what bothers me.
What bothers
You don't know. This drops at 3 a.m, I think, is when Shane drops it, just for those early risers, because we have a few. And I am just like curious if that was obnoxious for the 3 a.m. riser.
No, people who are rising at 3 a.m. knows they're ready to go. It's the ones that are barely opening their eyes at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock that want no talking, no noise until 2 p.m. That's those folks.
Okay.
That would find that obnoxious. So that's probably you.
That's not true.
Don't be so sensitive.
Oh, girl. Oh, what a passive-aggressive way of sharing your own emotional experience. Do you know that that's what that is?
No, I did not.
Girl, that's what I had a different topic today, but now we're talking about this. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
Really?
This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about being sensitive.
Okay.
Oh, girl. What you just did in that moment, everybody listen to this, especially if you've ever been called sensitive. What Kyle just did in that moment, besides being a complete jerk, passive-aggressive jerk. Actually, I'm just kidding. What Kyle just did is when someone calls you sensitive, like you're too sensitive, you're so sensitive, what they're actually interpreting is their own emotional experience of the world. That's what they're interpreting. That's what they're interpreting.
Tell me more about that.
This is the thing. Your brain, its whole function, the brain's whole function is to use peripheral sensory data
True.
to basically help you regulate so that you can propagate the next generation. That's your brain's primary job.
Yeah.
And it uses fragments of sensory data. Okay, and just so I'm getting into research already here. That's good. We'll just change. We'll just change the order today. This comes from Lisa Feldman Barrett. So you can look this up on YouTube. The New Scientific Understanding of Emotions.
Okay.
Okay.
I like that.
She's written 2 books. She is a brilliant researcher. She looked at meta-analysis of emotions and brain research and the connection. You know how we talk about the amygdala, the lizard brain, or the croc brain taking over and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And we can call it like an amygdala hijack and that kind of thing. It's not real. Your amygdala, like for example, in all of the data, the amygdala response showed up for, mostly we talk about it for fear, right? The amygdala response in all of the research showed up 30% of the time. So that is still statistically significant enough to have a peer-reviewed paper, or rigorously
Wow, there's some serious words you were throwing out there.
Girl,
I thought you were going to say it's sickening. I thought those are the word you were
Bitter
quoting.
Betty's butter. Bent backwards.
Rigorous and significant. I thought you were actually going to say sickening.
30% is enough to have a paper, like rigorously peer-reviewed paper put in a medical journal. But when you look at the meta-analysis, it only showed up in 30% of the studies. So it is statistically significant, but that means that your brain can, like your brain can also, or maybe, let me get the words right on this, because if there's researchers listening, in 70% of the studies, your brain was getting to fear in different ways. So the amygdala isn't always involved. So the whole croc brain thing is kind of out the window, right? So the theory is like layer upon layer, right? You have your amygdala and then your limbic system and then the neocortex. And then we call it the battle of the brain, where the neocortex is in a battle with the limbic, the older parts of the brain, the amygdala and the neocortex. But actually what she did, her and her peers looked at thousands upon thousands upon thousands of studies around emotion and brain scans and this and that. And what they discovered, so this is a meta-analysis of the best research is what this is. So what they discovered are that there are a significant amount of myths in our beliefs around the world. So when it comes to sensitivity, I'm going to tell a story now.
Okay.
Girl, twice in my career, I was called Mr. Sensitive. Twice. One time I was working for a leader. I'm going to call her Sally, even though that's her real name. And
I'm going to call her Sally. And that's her real name. Yes.
It is. Girl, it's her real name.
Whoa. Okay.
Girl, he had to lean back for that last girl. She leaned back.
You are not holding any of the punches today, eh? You're like, sensitive? I'll show you sensitive. Let me call her out. Okay.
But I think people need to hear this, though.
Okay. Okay. Go. I'm curious.
I think people need to hear this, because I think sensitive people in the workplace get a bad rap, particularly in the corporate world. And it's like, but I don't think people understand the advantage that there is to leading with emotion. So they're like, are people sensitive? It's like, again, that's an interpretation of somebody's own emotional experience with what they're seeing. And I'm going to explain this in a couple minutes here, but Sally, I was working at Black's Photography. What Sally didn't know is that I was in my first year of sobriety from being like a hardcore drug addict. Oh my God, drugs were a problem. For me anyway. But so there, I was having some volatile moments for sure, where it's just like, it's like she'd say things and I would get kind of wrapped up in it and lead with my emotion.
Right.
And again, this goes back to a conversation that we've had around a conversation we've had around like leaders not leading, but being good managers. And Sally was a phenomenal manager. Like, she could get the job done. She ran 2 stores in the same vicinity. There was a Black's Photography on the 2nd floor of Eaton Center and a Black's Photography on the 1st floor of TD Square. And she ran them both. Right. So, so like, she could manage. Right. Like, she could get the job done. Smart lady, nice lady, right? Funny lady too, right? But terrible leadership.
Yeah, that's okay.
So she, we're sitting down having a conversation, and she says, "Okay, Mr. Sensitive, we need to have a conversation."
Really? She just started off just like that. Mr. Sensitive.
Yeah. And we are taught that sensitivity is a liability in the workplace. And so it's just like, I was angry. I was upset. And, which to the sensitive person, like, because we don't see sensitivity as a superpower. We don't, but it is. Sensitivity is a superpower, right? Because what sensitivity means is that you are highly attuned to your own human experience and the emotions that you're feeling. What sensitive people have is what we call emotional granularity. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Girl, I'm on
Yeah,
today.
I was just gonna say, I just said one word to you, and we have this research, we have this breakdown. You've just changed the way I think about the croc brain now that I've been coaching and talking about for a long time. So this is great. It's very refreshing, actually, to get this insight.
Well,
So
it explains so much
yeah,
about some
and it makes sense. That's
hunches
what I
that I
like about
had.
it. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the point. So here,
yeah.
so basically, being a young worker, I
Mhm,
walk away and I see, and having, a stepdad who's a former Calgary police officer and
mhm,
very logic based, very rationally based,
mhm.
he was the first person in my life. Although I also had some encouragement from my stepmom in this way, in
Mhm.
probably, I would say her approach was more pragmatic,
Right.
than my stepdad's, but they were very much like kind of check your emotions at the door,
Hmm.
right? Check your emotions at the door and make a rational, logical, objective decision.
Hmm.
And
Which
it's
we've chatted
interesting
about. Yeah.
because I have trained myself to remain objective. But objectivity and sensitivity are metaphors for
Hmm.
how we describe our own emotional human experience.
Hmm.
So I walk away from Sally and I'm feeling, like, oh, sensitivity is bad. This is the third time I'm hearing it now from somebody that I respect, stepmom,
Right.
stepdad. And by the way, if you ever tell my step parents that I respect them, I will come for you. Do not let them know.
I'm gonna
I don't want
send
them.
him.
I
I'm
don't
gonna
want them to
send
know
him
that.
this podcast.
So, so, I actually sent him this research. Do you know what his response was? I sent him this research and I just kind of
Yeah.
outlined it because he and I have this conversation about emotion versus rational decision making all the time. So
Okay.
I sent him this research, and do you know what his response was?
Profanity for sure.
It was "fuck you" with 13
Yeah. There you
exclamation
go.
marks.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. That's an emotional response, Mr.
Yeah.
Sensitive. So anyway, I walk away from Sally. Third time I'm hearing this, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a liability. Sensitivity is a liability. Check your emotions, right? So I train
Hmm.
myself. I go through my time at WestJet. WestJet, actually, I think there was a different appreciation and understanding of sensitivity in that company because of the
Right.
culture of the company. I
Yeah.
don't think that there were a lot of strong leaders, really great managers, some
Hmm.
strong leaders,
Hmm.
but I think it was just no accountability to good leadership, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but there was a different understanding. I go into oil and gas, right? So now I'm in my, late 20s, early 30s. I go into the oil and gas industry, and it's a totally, very different industry.
Hmm.
And I heard the same thing from a vice president as well as a director. Oh, you're very sensitive, aren't you? But it wasn't as a compliment as it was as a,
Hmm.
I'm uncomfortable with this. Again, it's their emotional experience. So
Exactly.
they're saying check it at the door.
Hmm.
I'm I'm curious because so again, I thought this is a liability. I've got to work on it.
Hmm.
And then I thought, well, how do I use this to my advantage? And then I went and became a life coach, and now we're award winning, and
Hmm.
we've built a company, and it's, I, for whatever success means by somebody's own definition,
Right.
I feel
Right.
like a
Right. Right. Yeah.
successful person, which does
Right.
not mean I have no problems,
Yeah.
right?
Which
Not as
just
many
means
as you, but
stepping in you're stepping into it, right? Which is what I like. I mean, can I share a story?
I wish you would.
Yeah, I was facilitating yesterday, and I think that, and I'm curious on your perspective because I believe there's a correlation here on this. So I was facilitating a workshop with one of our corporate clients and with their team, and we're going through it, and we're breaking down a few things, and one of the participants said, I have to recognize that I can't take it personal, and I just kind of stopped him, and I just said, but it is personal.
It is personal though
It
because
is
it's
personal.
it's only your experience.
And you're acutely aware of that experience, just like what you just said. And there's nothing wrong. Just because I take it personal doesn't mean it's this negative thing that I'm going to blow up. I could take something personal to say, I'm going to do a better job with this thing. I could take something personal and say, I actually care a lot about this thing. Because it is personal. You are a person. Who else are you going to take it as? I can't take it as you. I can't take it as other people, right? I could be mindful of my sensitivity, my emotions, the personal impact I'm having, the story I tell myself, and then say, I'm going to choose differently. And do you know what he said? He's like, I have just been taught that I should didn't just don't take things personal. And I said, tell me what happens when you say you don't take things personal, because I know you still do. And he goes, yeah, I do. So then who are you saying don't take it personal to? Because if it
See, and
doesn't
that's
change anything, then why bother?
see,
Right?
that's
Or
very intuitive.
you're stifling your own thing that you want to do, right? Which doesn't make sense because it's going to come back. So,
That's very intuitive, Kyle, of you. And the interesting thing about this is that even intuition, it's still an emotion based off history. So this is how it works. Let's go back to the brain thing. Can we do that for
okay.
a second?
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
So this is the brain thing. The brain thing. Oh, I hope those geese are not nesting
I
up there.
just looked
Oh,
at it. Yeah, I
sorry.
just I looked at it and I said, I know he's gonna comment on it. We can see this. We're in different offices, but we can see the same areas. And there's this building and these, and I just like, please do not mention anything about it. They're
I'm
gonna
sorry,
be
I
fine.
forgot. I forgot we were doing a podcast. I'm just like, I'm such an animal lover, right, Mr. Sensitive. So I'm like looking out the window and I see these two beautiful geese just like flying in,
Yeah,
and I just hope they're not nesting on that building because I don't know how
yeah.
their babies are gonna get down.
Uh,
Anyway,
if you were
so
watching this, you would see my eyes flick up because I see it as well. And I brought it back down. And in that moment, I said to myself, Lord, do not let this man see that. And you did. Anyway,
I
okay.
did. Okay,
Break it down.
so
Break it down.
So I'm going to break it down. So think of it this way. Like in the old style computers, you had like a CPU box, right? It was a
Right.
box, and then you had to
Yep.
attach a monitor to it, and you
Everything
had to
to it.
attach a mouse to it and a keyboard to it.
Everything.
And
Yep.
and so, but here's the thing. The compute without those things, you could turn the computer on and the computer would be running,
Right. Just
right? It
couldn't
would
see
still
it.
be doing what it's doing. Our brain is doing that all of the time. But what
It's a great
it's
metaphor.
using, think of like the, eyes and touch, and so it's sensory
Five
data.
senses. Yeah.
And so what it's doing is it's taking fragments of sensory data, and that's all we get is fragments because we never get the whole picture. We get fragments of sensory data, and our brain takes that and it processes it, uh, relying on history. So based off previous experience, where it doesn't have history, it builds.
Right.
So you can't actually create this. You don't create emotions. Your brain builds emotions based off of that as a matter of regulation. So the emotions are there to regulate, right?
Right.
That's what they're there. So anybody that says, leave your emotions at the door, check it at the door, your brain prevents you from doing that.
Yep.
Your brain prevents you. You cannot have a single, unless you are not neurotypical, you cannot have an interpretation without emotion. You
Right.
cannot have an interpretation without emotion. We're going to put this YouTube link where she summarizes all this data. It's from the Institute of Coaching. We're going to put the YouTube link in our chat. Everybody needs to
Yeah,
know.
I think that's great for people to just get the detail because I know we can't cover it all, but there's opportunities for you to be able to click on that.
Why are you
and
trying
see
to
more
rush me? Are you trying
information.
to rush me on this podcast?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's just because I know when people are listening to like even myself, I'm just like, oh well, tell me more. Let's talk about that more. And again, that's just a whole nother story. But sometimes because for some people, including myself, there's a paradigm shift that's happening, right? So it's like what you've been known, what you're accustomed to, what you hear about, and then you move in it because for so long, so many people have been told to check their emotions or don't rely on their emotions. I know it was, a few years ago, I've stepped more into my emotions, right? Just being aware of it, allow it to process. Don't be so quick to turn it off, right? But be mindful, say, okay, great. I understand why I'm feeling that way. I understand what's happening for me right now and being deliberate about my next words or choices, right? And still honor the emotional piece of me.
That's totally it, right? So we all of our experiences, Kyle, we use to predict, right? We use to predict because it prediction is about regulation. It's about saving energy in the body, right?
Of course, yeah.
So we use to predict. We use this information, and we use what we see, feel, touch, taste, smell in combination with our emotions and the history of those emotions. So there's a couple of things that I think that people need to know,
Okay.
especially Sally and Chris and Andy. Andy was
Okay.
he was something else. I'll tell you what. Oh, he invited me to leave TransCanada so many times, and everybody loved him as a VP.
Right.
But he was the most disorganized vice president I have ever worked
Yeah.
with.
Wow,
I didn't work for him. I
The
worked
bus
with him.
today. That bus is in full steam today. That's the hydraulics on this bus. The amount of bodies you're running over.
You know, they're all good people,
Of course.
right? But so here's a couple things that people can also know.
Okay.
First thing is, we cannot actually read emotion on people's face. We cannot predict the emotion that we're reading on people's faces. So like, as an example, when we furrow our brow, we say that's scowling, and scowling is an indication of anger. But actually, in the research, scowling showed up only 30% of the time with anger. That
For
means
anger.
so that does, it's statistically significant. Scowling can definitely mean anger, is what that's saying. But 70% of the time we might be doing something else with anger. Right? So the idea here is that we don't, like, your interpretation is like, oh, they must be angry. Do you remember I used to do this all the time, where I'm like, I don't think this audience is engaged. Do you remember I would say that? And I would base it off of what their faces are. And you're like, no, Christopher, they're concentrating.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
exactly.
are you sure? Right? Like, and he's like,
Because
no,
I used to do it and
notes.
used to say that too. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So it's well, no, that never happened. I've never been wrong with you except for that one time. And the one time I was wrong with you was when I chose to make you my friend.
I'm scowling. For those people who are wondering, yeah, I have the scowl look on my face.
See, I would interpret your look as confused, maybe a little dumbfounded. Okay, so let's talk about this. So we cannot actually read people's faces. That doesn't exist. What we're doing is we're taking the sensory data that we receive into our body, and we're using our history and our emotions. And you are always using your emotions because your brain prevents you from having any interaction with the world without emotion. It prevents you from doing it.
Right.
So the idea is that you're relying on history and saying, oh, they're angry or they're sad or whatever, right? But it's not necessarily true. So we don't want to do that. The face does not speak for itself. Therefore, this face does not speak for someone's emotion. Your brain is guessing. Even if you read others well, you're still guessing.
Right.
Right? So it uses history to detect. That's what it does. Okay. The other thing is there's no dedicated circuitry in the brain for your emotions. So it's like, we think fear comes from this place, anger comes from this place. Actually, just like everything, you know how there's people who have a stroke and the part of their brain dies that allows them to, use their left side, but then their brain makes a new neural pathway and they start using their left side again. Right.
Yeah.
So just emotions are the same. There's no dedicated pathway for emotional circuitry. It happens in all sorts of ways in our brain. Okay. The third thing, another myth, is that is the body is important for emotion, but unimportant for thinking. That's untrue. You cannot think without emotion. It is absolutely impossible. So these people that use, that call me Mr. Sensitive, or people that are extremely pragmatic, people who are non-emotional, and us sensitive people wish we could be more like that because life would be easier. Actually, Kyle, it's untrue. They're still using emotion.
Of course. Yeah.
They're still using emotion to make their decisions. The only time that isn't true is if they're not neurotypical.
Right. Like me. Okay. Got it.
Well, no, you're not. That's not the truth, actually. Even though people who work with you would say that you probably have some sociopathic tendencies. I know everybody in this office is like vying for a psychological review.
Oh my lord. Oh my lord.
Okay, so what can people do with this?
Good question.
Because we're at some time here, so
Okay.
gotta move
Yeah.
things along.
Yeah.
What can people do with this? So here's the thing. Ideally, we want to create experiences that seed our brains to predict flexibly. This is actually what emotional intelligence is about,
Spout.
right? It is about making sure we can predict flexibly. So instead of when we see a circumstance, we get angry, it's like, well, what else could there, what other things could be happening? So I do this all the time when I drive, right? It's like I used to be a very angry driver, extremely angry driver. We'll tell that story another day. And and similarly to Kyle used to be very dismissive. If he couldn't get what he wanted, he moved on very
Yes.
quickly, right?
Done.
And so
Yes.
so in my in this case with driving now, one of the ways that I see different experiences so my brain could predict differently is I start to make different assumptions, as opposed to they did that deliberately. It's more like, oh, what if their grandma's in the hospital dying? What if they're in an emergency? What if they're just a little bit tired and made an absent-minded mistake?
Yeah.
Right?
Or
Because
want to get home to the toilet right away. Yeah.
yeah, because we've all done it, right?
Yeah.
So we've all had that experience in some form or another, right? So when I do that, all of a sudden my brain starts to predict differently. So now when somebody cuts me off, my instant reaction is to wave.
Yeah.
I just wave. And it's weird. Like some of them are like, why are you waving at me? And I'm like, I don't know. Now that's my new habit.
I would think some will wave back because then they realize what they've done maybe, and they would just as a reaction. Do you find that they wave back to you? Yeah, just say.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah, I could see that for some people. Like, oh,
sometimes they do.
Because I know sometimes when you and I, if we cut someone off or did something or didn't even see someone walking by something and almost hit them, we're like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, because we're just like, I realize it right now.
It's funny the reaction you get. Some people get madder. Some people get the emotion disgust. So they're like, you're like you shouldn't have screwed up, even though you're apologizing. That kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's like, how dare you?
And some people are like, okay, like thanks for apologizing, right?
Yeah.
So here's what else people can do. So cultivate these experiences,
right,
to think differently. Ideally, you do it in the moment. But it's hard. It's like exercise. It's still a good investment of your time and money. This is why Kyle, as coaches, we're quite unique with our clients in the sense that it's never been about the session. It's always been about the life. And why we allow our clients to reach out to us between sessions. It's not a 24/7 helpline, but this is what makes us so unique, is because we do allow for that. And I have told my clients this, like in the moment, I need you to reach out to me rather than waiting, because the coaching in the moment might be more valuable than waiting a week and a half until your next session, right? So sometimes that's not possible, but the closer we can catch it, the more likely we can do. Now, that was kind of an intuitive thing. Like I was doing it because I knew it was the right thing to do based off of my own experience using outside sensory data and my own history and experience. I knew that was helpful, but I didn't know why. Now I know why, because we're changing the experience in the moment so that we're creating new histories for our brain, so that there's different ways of doing it. This is what good psychologists do. Bad psychologists keep you in just talk therapy.
Yeah.
Right? Good psychologists, they do a bit of talk therapy, but then they move you into this realm.
And that's what people want anyway. They do, right? With knowing or not, that is what they want.
Well, some don't know that that's what they want, right? Like there are people who just keep finding the next professional to tell their story to. So ideally, we do this in the moment. I'll give you an example. I was doing this last night. Last night, I was feeling quite anxious. So I get some of our listeners will relate to this. I get a little bit of kind of like health anxiety. So like I'm so attuned to the sensations in my body. That's that sensory perception. But based off of, this is what I understand now, is that based off of my history, I'm over focused on the sensory experience in my body. So my brain is misinterpreting the data into, oh, this is a health issue, right? And
Right. Making
having
it to
just,
something that it might not be.
that's
Yeah.
it. So having just had our vaccines, I'm thinking, every tick and bop, I'm like, am I, one of the 0.016% of people who's going to have an adverse reaction and get a blood clot, or,
Right.
like this is where my brain goes. And I know I'm
Right.
not alone in this. Like this is more common than people realize. But
Yeah.
what's happening is that I'm over interpreting the sensory data based off of my history, right? Well, not over interpreting. I'm just
Yeah.
interpreting.
Just
My
over.
brain is
Yeah.
interpreting the sensory data, what's happening in my body based off history. And so what the history that's locked in is a history of medical trauma, right? So
Right.
my brain is more hyper attuned to it. This is what's happening. So super powerful experience. So last night in the moment, to create resiliency, I was retraining my brain to predict more fluidly and flexibly in the future. So I'm saying, well, that's fear, right? So you got to name the emotion. That's fear. And the idea with it is that I start to change the story. So I undo my history. So I try to put other things. I'm like, well, it could be a blood clot, but what else could it be? Well, it could just be that I've had 2 nights of poor sleep. It could be that I've created a bias to focusing on my body sensations because I know I just had a vaccine. So now that's my focus. It's like saying, Kyle, don't think about the color red. Just don't think about it. What are you noticing right now?
Red.
Everything that's red, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
it creates that bias, right? So
Yeah.
so it's like, maybe it's that. I'm like, maybe I ate something that's, maybe I started, like, I increased my physical activity. So maybe
I've
I'm
done something
experiencing
there.
my body in a new way right now. And so just kind of training flexibly. So what the interesting thing was, is that the anxiety started to come down, right? The anxiety started to come down. And this morning when I woke up, and and I'm not ignoring symptoms, by the way, but some of the symptoms were there. I was like, oh, that could be anything, so it's, it feels better than yesterday. So it's not a problem, like these
Yeah.
kinds of things. Right. So, and listen, like, check with your doctor. I'm going to do the whole liability thing. Check with your doctor, blah, blah, blah. It's just, I know my body well enough to know.
Yeah.
So this is part of what people can do. The other thing that they can do is focus, and this will be my last point because I know that we've got to wrap this up. The other thing that they can do is focus on emotional granularity. So basically what this means, and this is the part that gets me, I feel, this is my emotional experience, I feel so righteous about this. And
That's true.
I feel very...
If there ever was a righteous song and a tambourine to go with it.
Oh, girl, you just listen to
picture
this sweet voice, this sweet, scratchy, bird-sounding voice. So here's the thing. I feel so validated by this next point, because people who talk about check your emotions at the door, we do have we have circumstances, not people. We have circumstances where we lead with emotion, or where it's tucked in the back end,
Right.
but it's always there. And so in certain circumstances, some people are leading with emotion. So the idea, if you're on the receiving end of somebody's, quote, sensitivity, find out what's happening with their emotion. What are they telling themselves based on their history, right? And then start to be flexible, help them get flexible with that, right? By saying, oh, this was my intent, or this is what I meant, whatever it is.
Right.
But I feel so justified, because it's like, but if I am leading with emotions in that moment, there's a reason why that's happening. And it's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's not Chris, Sally, or Andy's fault. It's just the circumstances, just like they have led with emotions at other times in their life, right? So the way that I look at, like, is it better that somebody is angry and shouting, or somebody is quietly angry and suppressing it? I'm not sure that either is right. The point is to acknowledge it and move through it. So this next point really speaks to this, because I have found in my experience, people like that, and even in my coaching, when they ask about, it's like, I'll say, well, what's the emotion you're feeling? And they'll say, well, I think that, John, blah, 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 or Jennifer, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and then I'll say, so what's the emotion?
Right.
And it's like, well, I think that, and I'm like, actually, what you're giving me is what you think. What I'm interested in is the emotion. And so I've actually handed my clients a list of emotions and said, I want you to choose some things off of this.
Right.
So the more emotionally granular we can be, the more flexibility we have when emotional events occur, therefore increasing our ability to predict flexible outcomes in the future. So the idea, emotional granularity, is have a big vocabulary for
Right.
emotional words
Space.
and use those words. So basically what she says is having a large vocabulary of emotional words, this allows the brain to have more flexible repertoire of emotional events, and it can make and perceive in others in particular situations. So basically, that's one aspect of emotional intelligence, is having a large vocabulary and utilizing that. A brain that is emotionally granular is a brain that can make any number of predictions and regulate action and experience in very flexible ways, in ways that allow people to cope better with immediate situations. People who are emotionally granular not only cope better with situations, they're also physically healthier and recover from illness faster. Doesn't that just blow your mind?
Yes.
Oh,
You
I'm
gave a
like
lot
in
today.
awe.
Yeah, you
I know,
gave a
and we're
lot
so
today.
over time. Oh my God. What
You
are we
gave a lot
doing?
today, which is good. Which is good. I think it's a big
But the
thing, especially
difference
when the
between
change
when
like
I
that.
lead a podcast and when you lead a podcast is that this is interesting.
So, what imperfect inspired actions are you going to take after listening to today's whopping filled great information today? We want to hear from you. Go out there, take some action, lead with your emotions, and it's okay to be sensitive.
It's our goal to build a global community of inspired action takers. And we can only do that with your help. So if you love inspired action, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting app and share us on your socials. You've heard from us. Now we want to hear from you. Go to inspiredactionpodcast.ca and tell us, what is the inspired action you took this week? Next week on Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans.
Unlike you, I'm very careful about what I put in my mouth. You know,
Yeah,
so
tell that to the last 15. Anyway, so today